The drugs aren't the problem. You're the problem. They're your solution. I remember working at that Gold's Gym. I'm literally going to my car and doing just enough heroin that they can't tell, but just enough so I can not get sick. So I make my good little religious mother drive me to get my drugs. We're gonna be 45 minutes late to get to my grandpa's funeral. I mean, I just made her pay for it when I got there too. I was like, oh, and I need 20 bucks, thanks. So my mother had known I used heroin, but she had never watched me use it. And so as we're driving up the highway, and I'm back there trying to find a vein, I can't find one, and I'm shaking, and I look up and I see her eyes in the rearview mirror, and she's just crying. And I remember thinking, if I could look what heartbreak looked like in the dictionary, like if there was a picture, it would be my mom's face in that moment. So I finally find the vein, and I do it, and I looked up and I said, I'm sorry, Mom. And in that moment, even though I wasn't sick anymore, no amount of drugs could fill this gaping hole inside of me.
Brad, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, before we got started, we were just talking 5 years ago was the last time you'd been out here.
Yeah.
It came out
literally almost 5 years ago exactly. It was September of 2019.
Yeah, so I've gotten to know you during that time. So we've remained in contact, and I'd say, Instagram friends is probably the best way to put it. We talk a lot on social media.
Text about sports sometimes.
Yeah. So we've stayed in contact and always got along with you. Love your content that you put out. But I wanted to have you on the show because what I haven't done with you is I haven't talked about your story, and I like the information that you put out. But I really want to go back to the origin of the sober bodybuilder, and like maybe take me back to the day before you decided to become sober. What did that look like for you, and where were you at in your life at that time?
Whew, that was a good setup. But thank you guys for having me on. Literally, this has been a bucket list item, so I checked it today. So thank you guys.
Right on.
Yeah, you guys were inspired me to start my show. I didn't even know other podcasts were out there other than Mind Pump. Listening to Sal drink a bunch of weight gainer and like shit in his pants. Yeah. Like old FSL. Yeah. I think that's what happened. I don't remember.
That is what happened. Yeah. Weight gainer 900. I remember that.
Like locked out outside and shit in the bush.
Yeah. Thank you. Episode 100 or something like that.
Dude, that's how long ago I was listening. So I'm just I'm honored to be here. Thank you guys. It's been cool. So kind of surreal. The day before, wow, you really set that up. The day before I got sober, I was currently living in a beautiful, like less than a Motel 6, so whatever that is. And I had been homeless that whole year. And I never slept on the streets because I was very resourceful, but I did not have a home. And I was beaten, I was broken, I was addicted to heroin and meth. I would put anything in my body really, but those were my two go-to things on a daily basis. And it was I was finally to the point where, so that had been, and we can go back if you want, but that was the end of a 10-year run. Really, I started using opiates regularly when I was 18. I was still in high school.
Did it start with like most people did, like the Vicodin and the pills, and then it progressed?
Were you injured and that's what how you got
No, I got really into, I was a chubby kid growing up and, was teased a little mostly by my friends, got into fitness about 14, about 14, almost 15. Had no idea what I was doing. I just followed random workouts and diet plans. I remember like one time I was eating breakfast, 4 egg whites and a half a grapefruit and like a little bit of oatmeal for breakfast. Like, I'm sure it was like some bikini girl competitor, but I had no idea what I was doing. But it transformed my body, and then I found the gym when I turned 16. And long story short, I had started dabbling with alcohol during that chubby phase. Obviously at a friend's house, stealing it from their mom. And I remember I hated the taste, but I sure liked the effect. And it was like for a brief moment, I didn't have to feel like being me. And so flash forward, I hit high school, and I'm super into lifting. I mean, I'm eating tuna fish and rice and salsa like 3 times a day in the hallways, just savagely eating tuna, like just stunk like shit. I was so dedicated. If I could go back to that dedication, I was so into it and completely transformed my body, packed on a ton of muscle. Like I was just in love. I was enthralled. But I had learned along the way by talking to these older guys at the gym, but super nice dudes. I look back, I used to pick their brain all the time. And they were so cool. And I'd be like, why are you doing that? They're like, it's a drop set. I'm like, what does that do? And they told me, they were like, do you drink? And I was like, yeah, a little. And they're like, you got to quit that shit. Like, if you're serious about this, drinking's not a part of it. And I was like, done. So I just quit. And so my junior year of high school, we pulled up to a party, and my friend offered me some pain pills. And this is still kind of how naive I was. I remember looking him dead in the eyes, and I was like, oh, I'm not in any pain. And he was like, no, they'll make you feel like you're drunk, but you don't have a hangover. And I was like, oh, shit, really? And he was like, yeah, I think a lot of the bodybuilders do them, which I don't know where he got that from, but I was like, done. And so I took him, and I don't remember shit about high school, but I remember that split level entry house. I remember these brown cabinets. I remember the red Solo cups. I remember when that feeling hit me. I had arrived. I was like, I want this feeling the rest of my life. And I was just immediately enthralled. You know, you hear these people that go through surgery, and I feel like there's two types of people: ones that take the pain pills and hate them, or ones that take them and I'm like, I kind of like those. I got to be careful.
Yeah.
I was very much the latter. And so that's how I really got into it. And that really it went pretty quick. Like,
did it escalate quick, or was it only at parties? Because I have a very similar story how it got introduced to me. Very similar. I was lifting weights. I was told, like, dude, you don't have to drink. You have this and one beer, and it feels like you're hella hammered. And I was like, oh, sold. Because I don't.
Wait, did you get into them?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. I had a mild Vicodin addiction that started in my 20s. And the way it happened was exactly that. I was not drinking because I cared about my physique. I had a buddy tell me.
Calorie free, basically.
Yeah, it was basically, hey, we can go to the bars, have one beer and one of these Vicodin, and you'll feel like you had 10 beers. And I was like, sold. And just like you, went, oh, I like this.
Yes.
But for me, it was only like a weekend party thing for a while. So that's how it was introduced to me, that I liked it, but I still didn't have access to it and a lot of it. So I was lucky I didn't get addicted till later. But that's how it was introduced to me. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, exact same. It was just a weekend party thing, and it was fun. And I really enjoyed them. And I was always trying to scheme to get more. In my senior year of high school, I got like 4 months till I graduate, and some of these older guys at the gym I'd kind of linked up with. And older to me at the time, I think they were like 22, 23, but I was 18. I like looked up to these cats. They were massive, jacked, and the one guy basically told me that, you can go down to Tijuana, Mexico, and you take off your door panels and you get down there. You go to the pharmacias, right? And you pack up like all the narcotics, right? I mean, pain pills, muscle relaxers, anabolic steroids. And you put those door panels back on. You put a sombrero on, and you drive through the border. And it's back when they were a good deal in the pharmacias. I heard they are not now, but so I did it, and I was nervous, but looking back, I think it was like idiot savant. I don't know how I wasn't petrified. Wow. I think if I did that shit today, I think I didn't realize the amount of federal felonies I was committing, like drug trafficking through country lines. And I got away with it.
Wow.
And I was like, holy shit. And I had taken a bunch of money from kids, got the shit. That's when my entrepreneurship began. I kind of joked. It was kind of serious.
The origin story.
Yeah, I had like a ledger and who owed me what and what I owed to people. And I ended up doing that 3 or 4 times. And but along the way, what happened was that was about 2002, 2003. And also that's when the Oxycontin pill mill things were really popular. So between what I was getting from Mexico and then you could get abundance of Oxycontin still on the street. I mean, they started tightening that up pretty soon after that, I believe. But I started using them daily, and I still went to high school. I still graduated. I was still jacked. My parents had no idea. It was like, I mean, I just used every day for like 4 months. And as I graduated, I got a job at Valley Total Fitness. You remember Bally's?
Yeah. Oh, I do.
It was still stuck in the 80s in 2003.
Yeah.
I got certified as a personal trainer when I was still in high school. My parents were like, you need to go to college. I was like, why would I go to college? I literally hate school. And like, we need to do something. So got certified, got a job there. And I remember thinking, it's time to grow up. Some kid had got busted doing the same thing I was doing at the border, and he went to a Mexican prison. And I was like, I'm out. I'm too pretty to go to prison. And so I'd heard about these things called withdrawals, but I hadn't actually experienced them. And the kids I was selling to were just like how me and you got started. They were just doing them on weekends. They weren't like pounding on my window at 4 a.m. like wanting their fix. And but I had heard about these things called withdrawals. And I was like, oh, I can tough it out. Probably just be a little bit. And when they hit me, I had never, for you guys who have not experienced that, hopefully, but it's like the worst flu you've had times 10 with this like borderline panic attack at all times. Like it's the anxiety along with the physical just is, you get it.
I went through it and I had the exact same situation where I had heard of it, but so the way it happened to me, I'll tell you, that was just like this, where those symptoms hit. And I'm like, what I think at that time, I actually don't think there's a connection to the pills yet. I actually think I got hit with like the worst flu I've ever been hit with. And I realized and I just told myself like the day before, like, oh, I'm going to stop doing these. I've been doing them consistent for a while. I'm going to stop doing it. This feeling hits, this crazy, flu virus, the shakes, hot, cold sweats, all the stuff that you're talking about. Right. And, I go and I'm like, man, I didn't get very good night's sleep the night before. I'm like, I'm going to go, I have some of them left in my cabinet. I'm going to take some just so I could take one so I could sleep. I went in there, I took one and everything went away and I felt amazing. I went, oh shit. So then I went online right away and started Googling Vicodin withdrawals.
Worst thing you could do.
And I started Googling and then I realized like I checked every box. I went, oh my God, I'm not sick. I'm going through withdrawals. That was the moment that I understood that. Up to that point, I had no idea.
And the instant gratification you get from taking that is insane. And so, I mean, it's crazy how you can go from so violently ill to so euphoric in a very short amount of time.
About 30 minutes, yeah.
Yeah. And so I went through, I got so sick and I was like, holy shit. So I reached out to a buddy. And long story short, he had me come over to his house. He said, my brother's got something for you. And the brother presented heroin. And I remember that was a line I had drawn in the sand. I'm youngest of 5 from a good family. I never watched they were religious growing up. I never watched them drink. I wasn't around. And I remember I was thinking, that's the line in the sand. Like heroin's for people who are junkies and living on the streets. Like that's something I'm not going to do. And he pulled out a syringe of heroin and I remember I said no, and about 30 seconds later, I was like, give it to me, let's try it. And so I remember after I did it, and we can kind of flash forward here, but the guy looked at me, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, hey, kid, I'm sorry, life's never going to be the same. And I remember thinking, oh, no, like certainly I'm not going to keep doing this. Keep in mind, I had no plan how to stop. And my life was never the same. I continued to use, and real quick, shit started to fall apart.
Remind me, what age are you? You just graduated high school at this point?
Yeah.
So you're
18
years old. Yeah. You get introduced to that.
So you have the withdrawal, you do the heroin, and you felt right away like, I'm okay, I feel good.
Like heroin's even crazier because it's literally within 2 seconds, you know?
And you're like, I'm okay. And then the feeling wears off. Are you immediately like, I need to do this again?
Yes. Yeah. And so, it's just this great chase. Anyone who's been addicted, and it's all the same. Heroin was just almost a little. It's obviously riskier. And now you got fentanyl, which I'm just so grateful I wasn't using during fentanyl. Mm-hmm. Yeah. People are dying right and left from that shit.
So I want to hear your opinion. So one of the things I've explained this to how some people get to heroin, and with the same type of intentions. Oh, I would never do that. But then what happens, and yours is a little bit different. And I was explaining this to my wife when I was sharing these old stories with her, is like, you go from having 4 or 5 Vicodin a day to 10 Vicodin a day to chewing 25 of them a day. Then you go like, well, shit, so many pills. Let me go to Oxycontin and I'll just take 2 of those a day. Then you're taking 10 Oxycontin a day and you go, man, this is just destroying my liver. It'd be better if I just shot it right into my vein. And it's actually a healthier choice. So a lot of these guys make that transition thinking they never would. You justify it because you go, I mean, taking 25 pills can't be good for me, right, Brad? Like, so going straight to the vein is a healthier choice.
Yeah.
And then, of course, then you feel it and you go, holy shit, instant. And that's how it a lot of times begins for people.
100%, even cheaper, right? And now fentanyl, I've heard, obviously I've been tried as cheaper than heroin, which is scary.
Hey, real quick, if you or someone you know is suffering from addiction, our friends at Rock Recovery Center have offered one of our viewers and listeners a free scholarship, $60,000 value, 4 months. You stay there and they help you get sober. If you're interested, click on this link.
And so it just progressed. The next 10 years, the best way to describe them is just incomprehensible demoralization. Like I was I would go through these periods. So what's crazy is for the first probably 6, 7, maybe 8 years of my addiction, maybe even a little longer, I still was into the gym. Like I was still like fairly jacked, and I was addicted to heroin and cocaine. Like I would shoot up a speedball and then I would go lift. It was nuts. Like,
So is it daily use you were doing?
yeah.
How were you funding this?
Well, for the first little bit, I had a job. I actually, I would have different jobs. I managed the Gold's Gym, the personal training department for a little bit, for better part of almost a year, which is crazy because I was loaded the whole entire time. Wow. But I don't know if there's a thing of a functioning heroin addict, but I was fairly functioning at the time. This was probably 24, 25 years old. And you know, I would do just a little bit in the morning, and then I'd be really cautious to like, you know, just make it spread out as far as I could. And then when I'd start feeling a little sick, I'd go use just a little more. And then when I got home, I'd do a big blast and be, you know, gone. And I didn't look the part. There's a picture from Christmas, probably 2008. And I've got my arms up in like a Y behind my niece. And I got these jacked arms and then just track marks, just black. I'll have to send you the picture. Like, and you know, I remember I would put makeup on them to try to hide them, but
Wow.
And it was just such a dichotomy to like look at me and be like I didn't look like a heroin addict, but yet I had these track marks. That's one reason why I have sleeve tattoos now, because they, I don't think they're ever coming back. They were just stained almost like a purplish black when you do heroin, and so I kept up this. It's almost like it fooled me that I really wasn't that bad.
Well, probably, I'm assuming, sorry to interrupt you, but I mean, it sounds like no one knows? Does no one have any idea?
No, they did.
Who's they?
My family, my parents.
At what point do they figure it out? If you were hiding it pretty well, what point do you think they knew?
So 6 months into using heroin, I wasn't living with them, but I got super distant, and they were like a little concerned, right? But when they'd see me, don't get me wrong, like I mean, you're kind of nodding out, and I'm just like, oh, I'm super tired, and but I called my mom when I finally I hit the spot where I'm like, dude, this is going nowhere fast, and I just said, hey, I need help, and she was like, what? And I was like, no, I need help. I need to go to rehab, and she was like, for what? And I said, I'm addicted to heroin, and she dropped the phone. I was just like, hello. I mean, she was in shock. So I would. You know, what would happen is I would go through these phases where I wouldn't just consecutively use. I would go on 3 or 4 or 5 month kind of benders. And then I would get sober for 30, 60, 90 days. Like it was a pretty common pattern. And I could fool people for the first couple months of my use. I wouldn't come around as much. And again, I oftentimes until the very end still kind of looked the part. Like I was still fairly jacked. I mean, it would change a little, but and then they would kind of catch on, you know, and then they would pressure me. I'd go to rehab. But I started getting locked up. I started going to jail in like 2005. And if you're not done using drugs and you keep going on probation, you're going to keep going to jail a lot. And so I think I went 17 times, 17 bookings in the county jail.
17 times?
That's back when they'd take you on anything. Nowadays, especially in California, you can do about anything and not go. Yeah. I mean,
now you're going because you're testing positive, so you're like,
yeah, or like I kept getting new charges. Even something small as like I would get pulled over, and you know the cop was suspicious. I often had like expired tags, and they would find paraphernalia. But it was always because I was still on probation for my other charge that they would take me in. But I didn't stay every time. Sometimes just book and release me. But I got to know that county jail pretty well, and towards the end of my my use, there is a good part of the story coming up, hopefully. You know, so I'd do this game 3 or 4 months, and then everyone would catch on. They would be like, oh my. So one of 3 things would intervene. Like, well, 2 things really. My parents, and they would either send me to detox or to rehab. I went to 6 or 7 different treatment centers, and you know, my parents would spend, you know, tens of thousands of dollars on these with the hope that I would come out and be fine. And every time I would stay sober for a little bit, and then I'd go right back to it. And I just wasn't done. I think about that a lot with people who are obese and need to lose weight, and they hit that streak where they get that fire and they lose a little weight, and then they go right back. And it's like, not that I'm necessarily comparing the two, because I think food addiction and drug addiction have some inherent differences, but
some things in common though too.
absolutely. Yeah. And so I can deploy empathy to that when people are kind of just like, oh, could you imagine being that fat and not getting together? I'm like, could you imagine being a junkie and not stopping? Like, it was pretty crazy. Like I would get shit back pretty quick. Like I would get a new job, and usually somewhere in the fitness industry or coaching, or and I would start making a little money, and and then every time I'd just go right back to it. And
were your intentions when you would stop really true, like I'm never doing it again? Or were you like, I'm managing this, I'll stop and then go back on after a couple months?
It depends. There was many times where I was like, no, I'm done for good. And but I wasn't doing the action part. I know you guys actually had two of my friends, Tom and Ben, on, right?
Yeah.
From and I was on their podcast when we were in Orlando together, and Ben's got a really similar story as mine. Like sometimes I would think I'm done, but I was just lying to myself because I wasn't actually doing the action part of like everything they had told me to do in rehab or AA meetings. I was just kind of like white knuckling it. And so then I would kind of be super surprised when I'd relapse. But now looking back, it was like, well, no shit, you relapsed. However, there was some times where I knew I was just like, all right, I'm gonna stay sober, get everyone off my back, and then I'll just use a little. And what I would do initially is say, I'm not going back to heroin. That clearly doesn't work for me, but I'm just gonna do a little GHB, or maybe I'll drink just a little, or maybe I'll do just a little bit of cocaine, which was just a horrible idea. That never works. And so I would do these things at first, and that's why I don't drink. I never necessarily had a problem with drinking per se. Like it was probably like my 7th favorite thing to do on the list, but it would always bring me back to, like, I would get just tipsy enough that somebody would be like, oh, you want to go to some blow, just cocaine? I'm like, yeah. And then I'd get that, and then I'd need to come down from that. So I'd call the dealer, and it was like
inhibitions would lower.
Yeah, every time. And, maybe it didn't happen the first time, but 3 or 4 times, and so that's why people have asked me, like, do you think you could drink today? I'm like, I don't really want to find out because it's not worth risking and I didn't like it enough to begin with. And so, yeah, I think that sometimes I knew I was going to go back out, and other times I really believed I wasn't,
What was the breaking point, or what was the last thing that made you finally be able to stop?
Yeah.
This is getting to the day before now. Right?
Yep. Now we get to the day before. So I spent all of 2011 in jail. And you want to talk about a moment where I got out. I remember the day. It was January 27th of 2012. My sobriety day is November 20th of 2012. And I got out on the 27th, and why I remember that day is because my birthday, I was about to say my belly button birthday. That's what they say in recovery, because you have a sobriety birthday. Like the day I was born was January 31st.
I didn't know that was a thing.
I about said that, and I'm like, yeah, they're going to get
I didn't know that was a thing.
When I say that to people, they're like, what in the fuck are you talking about? So my actual birthday was the 31st, and I'd either not shown up to a birthday party, period, or shown up sober in years. And my parents were so thrilled, and I really believed. I remember they said there's something different in your voice, because I'd go to jail for like 30 or 60, 90 days, but a whole year, I was like, oh, Mom, I've never had this much clean time. I'm done. I wasn't married and have kids. Thank God, no kids. It's a whole different discussion. But I really believed I was done, like to the core. I had never been sober that long, and I got out. But there's a difference of being sober and being in recovery. And being in recovery to me is an action. Like, I'm working every day to become a better man, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And I wasn't in there. I was doing a lot of the same shit I was doing here. I was getting in some fights. I was bartering and gambling and You
just didn't have access to heroin.
Yeah, we just didn't have access to pills. I mean, you can get more drugs in the prison, but not really the county jail as much. I mean, I'm sure some people bring it in, but not where I was at. And I did the drug treatment program even in there, and I did it just kind of be like, all right, whatever, something to do. And I got out, and the itch came back. Like, I got out, and I remember I was like, no, I'm done. And I was like, but I don't think I need to do any of that recovery stuff. Like, I just needed this whole year to be sober. That's it. Like, I still think I didn't fully believe. I think I just thought I believed that I just needed enough time away from it, and that was the answer. And for somebody who is not a true drug addict, that might be true. But for a guy that suffers from addiction like I did, like this disease in my brain, And it came back, and I remember I was sweating, my palms were, and I called the dealer, and I'm like, my stomach, I'm about to shit my pants, you know, that feeling. And I'm just like, oh, and I'm like, he's not going to answer. Drug dealers frequently change their number. And he answered. And I remember he told me, he said, hey, come downtown. And I remember I start driving down there, and I did exactly what they told me to do in rehab, which was play the tape through. And I played the tape through, and the tape went, you're going to go pick up. If you don't die, because that's actually when most people die, is when they've had time away from it, and then
they go too hard.
It. Yeah. You're not going to stop till something stops you. You're not going to show up to your birthday. My parents had finally joined a program called Al-Anon, which is basically a sister program for AA. And they had learned these things called boundaries, which is just the worst word for an addict. And they said, hey, we love you, but if you decide to use again, we're done. We're done. And I actually believed them. And I was like, your parents are going to be done with you. And I'm crying on the way down, and I'm still going. And it was that moment I realized how powerless, like without a solution of recovery, like this shit was going to eat me alive. And I couldn't believe I was doing it. I couldn't believe I was going. And so I picked up. I didn't die, clearly. But that started a run of not drawing a sober breath from that day until November 20th, my sobriety date. And during that time, I was homeless the whole year. My parents did, in fact, cut me off. It was the best thing they could have done for me. And when I got sober, they didn't give me shit. And I'm so grateful for that.
Were you initially angry at them for that? Or did you? Or
so angry.
You were?
Oh, yeah. I felt like the biggest victim. Find me a really good addict, and I'll find you a really good victim with me. Like, I mean, it was just, could you believe my parents just... My dad said, if you come around here, we'll call the cops. Keep in mind, I'd stolen all his business checks, forged them. Like, this wasn't like just because they, were mad I was using. Like, I was destructive to their lives. I mean, my parents have been married 50 years, and they almost got a divorce over me because my mom would keep enabling me, and my dad was like, stop doing this shit. And so I went to their house one time to get some food because I was hungry, and my dad called the cops. And I remember I just told all my friends, could you believe my dad's such a prick? And
God, you have to, now that you're for the audience, you're a father of an almost 5-year-old. How hard that had to have been for your dad to do that.
Dude.
Like, and now, now, because you're like, I look back, it was the best thing I ever did. Going through that, you're mad at him. But looking back now and fast forward where you're at and being a father, imagine how hard that was for him.
I can't even imagine, I can't imagine now. But my dad is one of the best men I know. If I ended up being half the man he is, I will have succeeded in life. And I hated that man for a long time.
Wow.
But he sticks to his word. He has integrity. He thinks before he talks. Yeah, sometimes it drives me nuts. Like, talk a little faster, Dad. But he rarely has to say I'm sorry because he's not. But I hated that about. And he wouldn't cave. He was like, nope. Till you're sober, you're not allowed around here. Period. The end. And I would be so hard. And when people reach out to me, parents on Instagram, it's so hard to not have much context. But I tell these people, like, listen, I'm not saying this is what. But if you have tried getting this kid or girl or whatever sober far more than they have, and you are consistently putting more energy in this, getting screwed, you got to back out. Like, I know that's the hardest thing, but I wouldn't have got sober if my parents didn't let me fall. Like, every time I'd about to hit that rock bottom, because they loved me, they'd put this little cushion under me so I'd still hit, but it would just be a little soft, They'd send me to a nice cushy detox or rehab and so the whole year goes by, and by the end of the year, it was getting, November in Utah is pretty cold. And, I'm scrounging place to stay. At that time, you asked me, how was I affording this? For the last few years of my addiction, it was all through illegal activity, which is also why I kept going to jail. Dealing, bartering, stealing, you name it. Like, I'm lucky to not be in prison. It was just the things, the extent you'll go to get your drugs are quite, it's insane. So the whole year goes by, and this is where the story gets good. Don't worry, listeners. I get to this place, and hopefully it's okay I talk about God on here, but, the last 3 days before my sobriety, I never thought God turned his back on me. I would hear people say that I would use with, and I'm like, oh, this isn't God's fault. Like, I'm willingly making this decisions. Like, now my parents, I thought, were really rude to do that to me, but
you at least had the awareness it wasn't God's fault.
Yeah, it was not God's fault. And I remember I got on my knees and prayed because I was starting to hang out with some listen, heroin addicts or fentanyl addicts or whatever, you just kind of drool on yourself and eat some macaroni and cheese and popsicles on a banana chair and like play video games. Like I would just go to these dudes' apartment and we would just like drool. When you start getting around methamphetamine addicts, it's a whole different game. Like there's a psychosis that comes with it. And I started linking up with some of the worst people I could probably find in Salt Lake, which I didn't even know they existed that bad. And I'm hanging out with these guys that are, being, chased by the feds for murder. And I'm just thinking, and I started hallucinating and I couldn't tell what was real or what's false, because when you don't sleep for 3 days and then you add in meth, I still to this day don't know some of what was real or just, an illusion in my head. And I started having this bad gut feeling, like so bad that if the drugs didn't kill me, these people I was hanging out with were going to. I started panicking. I owed some of them money and I'm like doing whatever I have to do to get them paid. And I'm just like, this is not good. And I couldn't describe it. It was the strongest gut feeling I had that was like, dude, you got to stop. So I started praying about 3 or 4 days before I finally got sober. And I just got on my knees and I was like, God, I don't know if you know who I am, but dude, I don't know what to do. Like I can't. The addiction was so strong that the withdrawals that I would go through every goddamn morning to get it was insane. Like every morning I'd wake up sick and I was the same Groundhog's Day. I would do what I had to do to get $10 to get one heroin balloon and then instantly feel better and then go scrounge, do more and then get, I remember I was so terrified of the withdrawals that I just kept, I was so terrified. And I remember I'd drive to the public detox and that's not a great place to get. So, just piss stains everywhere. And I would go to check myself in and I'd leave. And so I started praying and I just said, you got to help me stop this. I don't know what to do. I had terminated off probation. So I had nothing hanging over my head for the first time. Cause that's what they gave me the year for, was like, we're done with you. You're going to go do a year in jail. No more paper. Like you're clearly not fit to be on probation. So we're just giving you your time and you're free to go. And so that whole year I didn't have like the cops bearing down my throat looking for me when I violated probation. And so I prayed and, God works in mysterious ways. It's not always, in fact, it's often not how I want, but it's always how I need. And honestly, my sobriety date says far more about God than it does me. And I really believe that. I put in a lot of footwork, but there were some miracles. So I prayed and my mom gave me a phone call on November 9th. I don't know what day it was actually. And she just said, hey, your grandfather's passed away. And I was like, shit. And she said, I really want you to go to the funeral. And I said, I want to go. I just was like, Brad, do something right this year. Just one thing, just show up. And she said to me, Brad, just do what you got to do to be right. And I knew what that meant. It meant don't be so high I'm drooling on myself or so high on meth that I'm paranoid and looking out the window. But, also don't be in withdrawals. And it's like finding that exact right balance that I could kind of function. It had long gone out the window. So the day came and she picked me up from that hotel and back to that day. And she, the drugs had ran out. Again, I didn't have a job. So and I couldn't make it last. And I started to go through the withdrawals, but it was pretty early. And I was like, I think I can make it through this. It's going to be tough, but I just show up. I had this strong feeling to show up. Well, pretty quickly out of nowhere, they got pretty violent like the half hour before she was coming. Like they hit me way harder than they normally do. Normally it's kind of this progression. And I'm shaking, I'm shivering, and I get in her car and she's just like, and then I vomit in her car and she looked at me and she was like, dude, you can't go up like this. What do we need to do? And I looked at her like, what do you think we need to do?
Hey, sorry to interrupt. Look, I have a free guide that teaches you how to lose fat in 3 steps, just 3 steps that will burn the most amount of body fat and help keep it off. This guide is totally free. We're giving it to everybody right now. If you want it, click on the link at the top of the description below. All right, back to the show.
So I make my good little religious mother drive me, clear out to the hood to get my drugs. And by this point, we're gonna be out, 45 minutes late to get to my grandpa's funeral, her father-in-law. And so we got in the, she said, get in the back seat. She's like, do what you got to do. I'm not stopping somewhere. Like, I can't believe you're doing this to me. Do whatever you have to do to be right. Like, I'm so sick of you. You're so selfish. I'm so mad, rightfully so. I just made her pay for it when I got there too. I was like, oh, and I need $20. Thanks.
Wow.
So my mother had known I used heroin, obviously, but she had never watched me use it. And so as we're driving up the highway, I'm sitting back there, and it's a gory scene to watch somebody use IV drugs. It's just there's tourniquets and blood, and I had shattered all my veins. I mean, they never came back, to be honest. And I'm back there trying to find a vein. Sorry for the graphic nature. And there's I can't find one, and I'm shaking. And I look up and I see her eyes in the rearview mirror, and she's just crying, and she's not like yupping. They're just like tears just rolling down her face. And I remember thinking, if like I could look what heartbreak looked like in the dictionary, like if there was a picture, it would be my mom's face in that moment. And I remember it so vividly, her just watching me. And I don't know how we didn't crash, because I don't even think she looked at the road. And I remember, so I finally find the vein, and I do it. And I looked up and I said, "I'm sorry, Mom." And she said, she didn't say a word. She just looked at me and shook her head, and her mascara is going everywhere. And I'm like, holy shit. And in that moment, even though I wasn't sick anymore, no amount of drugs could fill this gaping hole inside of me. And I remember I thought very clearly, you have two options right now. You can either kill yourself or you can get sober. You cannot go on a day like this. And the first seemed really like a better idea, because when you've tried 59 times, I don't know if that's a real number, but like, there's not much hope that the 50 is going to be the shot, or like however many times I probably tried legitimately 24 times. And I'm like, but I remember thinking, that was one of the most selfish things you've ever done. But if you kill yourself, that's the most selfish thing you could do. Like, and we went to the funeral, and I got done with the funeral, and my brother was driving me back, and he was like, "Dude, you can't do this. You can't live like this. Like, you got to get your shit together." And I said, "I know." And I prayed again, and I was just like, "God, like, I don't want to kill myself, but I don't know what to do. Make this end." And 20 minutes later, I'm going with some guy named Gumby. I don't know his real name, to get drugs. And he said, "Hey, will you drive? I'm too messed up." And so I get in this car, and this is another God shot divine intervention. And I know that to be true today. I was getting on the on-ramp, and all of a sudden this cop gets behind me and puts on his lights. And I'm like, "Why are we getting pulled over?" And he said, "Oh shit, man, this car is stolen." He's panicking. And I was like,
And you're driving.
"Oh, cool." And I remember there was this brief moment where I was like, maybe I should like go on a high speed chase. And I'm like, I'm in like a 1994 Hyundai Elantra. I'm like,
you're not getting very far.
I'm not going to win.
Oh, man.
And so I pulled over, and it was crazy. I can't even explain the moment of relief that came over me, of just, I took a deep breath, and I was like, holy shit, this is it. Like, this is it. I'm done. I couldn't explain it. It was cop. Yep. He didn't come up to the window nicely. He was like, a gun pull. Then he was like, "Get out of the car." And I'm like, "Okay." I'm putting my hands out. And I'm like, "Dude, I'm a nice guy. I want to go to jail." And he was like, "On your knees, right?" And he was cool. He didn't like tackle me to the ground. But like when you're in a stolen car, they're not just like, "Hey, can I see your license and registration?" Yeah. They're like, "Get out of the car," and guns. And I'm like, "I know the car's stolen, but I really didn't know. But now I know." And, that cop took me to jail, and I remember he had a really good chat with me on the way there, and I just said, "Man, I'm done." And he goes, "I've heard that a lot from the back of that cop car." And I said, "Oh, bro, I've said it a lot." So I was like, "But I mean it." And, he took the time to ask about my story and how I got into this. Like, and, when he came up and arrested me, I said, "Listen, man, I was on my way to get drugs. I was thinking about killing myself." And he was like, I'm like, "Not now, like just earlier, like we're good. You don't need to." And that's where my journey began. And I did 30 days was all charged. The charges were dropped. He stole it from a family member. They decided not to pursue.
Oh, wow.
But it was just enough time for me to go through the most hellacious detox of my whole entire life. I remember laying on that cement floor in the jail and just laying in my own vomit and just thinking, like, this is the last time you have to do this if you want to. This is the last time. You feel like you're going to die, but you're not. And, they called me to go home, and I remember I called my mom, and I told her, and I said, "Hey, I'm out." And she goes, "Shit." And she said, "You can't come here. Your dad won't let you till you get more sobriety." She said, "Well, I'll take you to a recovery meeting." So she took me to a recovery meeting, like an AA meeting. It was a CA meeting, actually, which is, they're all the same, but dropped me off. And that's where my journey began, dude. And that was December 23rd of 2012, 2 days before Christmas. And, I finally I went left instead of right. Like I finally just said, everything they've told me to do, I'm going to do it for a year. And if my life still sucks, screw it. I'll go back and just succumb to being a junkie. But wouldn't you know, just like with fitness, you just do all the shit you need to do for a year, like your life can change dramatically. And it did. Like by the time I'd hit a year sober, my life was, if you had asked me to write down what I wanted out of my first year of sobriety, and it wasn't always peaches and candy cane, there were some really hard times in there, really hard. And coming to the reality that you've been a giant piece of shit, and at 29 years old, 28 years old, you have absolutely nothing to your name. I had I had a car that was a 2-door that was really a 1-door because the passenger side was like welded shut. So I'd like hang out with the girls and I'd be like, you just gotta jump through, you gotta go through the driver's side there, just hop on over. But I was so grateful for that $500 car I bought. Like every little milestone I was so grateful for. And sometimes I'm jealous of just looking back. I wish I could tap into that, man. Like you start getting, I was so grateful for everything, just the smallest shit. I rented a room and I went from having a mattress on a floor to an actual bed, and I was just stoked.
Over the moon.
Like, this shit is so cool. I've got a bed now. Like, and yeah, my life is, it's almost 12 years later. Next month is just beyond my wildest dreams, man.
What point did
It was a lot longer than I was planning to
No,
get.
no, I think you set the table. I mean,
very honest and vulnerable.
Yeah.
Very good, huh?
When what point? Because I'm sure this was a really important moment for you too, where you felt like you had won your dad back over, or you had proved to him.
Yeah. So part of the 12 steps, which I'm a huge believer in for anything. I think and part of the step is 9th step is you make direct amends to people that you've harmed.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why it comes so I'd been sober about 9 or 10 months at this point. And I took him to lunch, took him to Applebee's. Horrible steaks. I think they're all closed, right?
Are they?
No, there's an Applebee's.
Oh, there's an Applebee's still?
It's good mozzarella.
Oh, that was
sticks,
that was the other one that went out of business. Ton of them did. Anyway, I digress. And I made my amends to him. And, I started calculating what they had spent on rehab. Little did I know, my dad had to take out a second mortgage on his house on one of them.
Wow.
They did everything they could. He drained some of his retirement. And I didn't know that. And so, I was hit with this guilt. And I remember I made that amends to him and I said, well, what can I do to make this better? Like, I don't know how I'm going to repay you this money. He says, I don't want the money. He's like, I just want you to live a life that's worth living. And and my dad was slow. My mom, by the time I was 6 months, she was my best cheerleader. She was like, you're so amazing. Like, she's just like, oh my gosh. And I think it was at my 1 year sobriety birthday dinner. Like, I had a bunch of my recovery friends come. I think there was probably 30 people there, family, friends. And that was the first time he came up to me and he said, hey, I'm proud of you. And I hadn't heard that out of his mouth since I was a kid. There was nothing to be proud of. And my dad is a man of very few words. So when he says something, he means it. And I think it was that moment that I was like, shit, this is amazing. And now, my dad takes a lot of service work into the prison. My dad is, he was a very religious man, but he lacked spirituality, by his own admission. He thought I was just a bad person that needed to get good. And he goes, what I've understood through this journey because he worked the 12 steps for Al-Anon, and he got, he's still very religious, but he got very spiritually connected. He said, you were a sick person that needed to get well, because he would just be like, you're such a bad person. That's what he'd say to me early on. Like, I can't believe, I didn't raise you to act like this. And so, he takes service work out of the prison, specifically helps inmates with drug. And I've been honored to go speak to these guys a few times. And it's just always a really cool moment when I get to do that stuff with them. And it takes time. It took, at that 1 year, but it probably took probably 2 or 3 before I feel like, okay, he really trusted me.
Well, yeah, I was just going to ask you because even at 1 year, I would think there'd be a part of you that's almost playing that imposter syndrome where you're like, well, I've been in a year sober before when I was in jail. At what point did you start believing in yourself? Like, there's probably a period there where you're like, you're doing the work, you're doing the discipline, but you might even have in the back of your head this fear of like, I could go back or I might go back. Was there a point when you felt the confidence in yourself, like, oh, I'm a different person now? You know what? It was probably closer to 4 years. So I started my business, which was formerly Key Nutrition is what it used to be called. It's now Next Level Nutrition. But in February of 2017, and I had been
I've been working in the coaching, working for somebody for the past, from basically early on in my sobriety, like early 2013 to this date. And I remember I had no clue how I was going to start this business. We had a brick and mortar at the time. Like I had no idea. And like I drained all my savings. And I remember I was like terrified of how am I going to do this? And I remember, my mom was like, I don't know anything about business, but I know that if you can get sober from a heroin addiction, like you can do this too. I mean, the only shit I know about business was from watching Gary Vee and watching Shark Tank. Like that's not a really good business plan. But she said, I know you know how to make things happen. Like you made it happen on the streets using every day, and you made it happen in the last 4 years. And I remember it was somewhere around that time, and I got the business going, and we started making some money that I was like, holy shit. I think this has changed. Like, I think I'm really doing this now.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen at 4 months. Before I would get 4 months and I would think I got this shit down. And then I would be humbled every time. And I was kind of living on the edge of my seat someday, like even into year 3 or 4, like, don't mess this up. Don't mess this up.
Right. Did you feel like you can see like had those skills that it took not only to like get drugs, but also even to power through and be resilient and not go back? Have you seen those apply to your business and having success with that and scaling that?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. 100%. I was telling you guys before, even one of the offerings I have in the coaching business I have is really all the principles I've learned in recovery. And I think what business and entrepreneurship did, I would hear these people share at meetings like, I'm a grateful alcoholic, and then and I'm just like, what in the fuck is the matter with you? Like, I am not grateful for this shit. Even at 5 or 6 years, I was like, nope. If I could have redone my 20s, I would have.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't exactly fun starting. Like I didn't even know how to like do laundry at like 29 years old. I was like glad I made it through it. Still not grateful it happened. I saw some horrific shit, bad shit happen. I really did some horrific shit to people that I don't even know. Like shit. My garage got stolen the other day, and I was like, this is my karma. Shit. But through business, I realized how much I relied back upon the principles, and one of the main principles, I'd say the main principle of the 12 steps, which I don't think people understand, or just even meetings, is God, and how much my spiritual connection is really, it's everything. Because without that, I still believe that no matter how long I've been away from the drugs, like I will go back if I start thinking I'm God or there isn't a God, and so many principles, just even with grit and tenacity and just the figure it out attitude. It finally hit me that I was asked on a podcast like 3 years ago, do you regret going through any of it? And it was actually the first time I answered it this way. And I said, no. I said, it has absolutely made me the man I am, and also the father. When I became a father, I think that was the moment that everything clicked. Like I'm so grateful for everything I went through. I honestly wouldn't change a thing, because without it, I don't think I would be this deeply connected to God.
What does your spiritual practice look like now? How do you maintain that?
I do a lot of meditation and lots of prayer. Sometimes very formal, sometimes very informal. And I've been reading a lot, and some of that, there was like a Christian daily devotional book, because I was like, listen, I don't know if I'm Christian. I know I love God, but like I need to develop this relationship more. And I mean, I would say those are the main things. But also really trying to get out in nature and just like be present and
away from the world.
Yeah.
You said your parents were really religious?
Yeah.
Do you think that their devotion helped save you?
100%. Even though I quit going to going to church when I was like 12, I remember just being in these places, and I had this just thing come over me, like, you're not supposed to be here. Like, I remember thinking, like, no offense to these people, but I'm not this bad, but clearly I am, right? But I absolutely think it did. And I mean, they prayed for me, and they had everyone in their church pray for me. And I'd go back to that church and be all strung out, and everyone was so kind to me, which I really appreciate. But I absolutely think that was huge in saving me. And I overdosed 6 times, and I'm not dead. Which is why I'm so passionate about trying to carry a message of recovery. Like, I don't do this shit perfect at all.
I was just going to ask you, how do you think God is using this?
When I first got sober, it was funny. I started working at this place, training people, and I was working with these like higher end clients, and I was so embarrassed to ever tell them that I was an addict or an alcoholic. Like, I didn't want them to know. And I remember I was chatting with a client. We were doing like our nutrition consult, and she was like, I just feel like I get like 3 or 4 good weeks and then I just implode. And it just came out of my mouth. I'm like, listen, I haven't had that struggle with food since I was like 12, but I've struggled with addiction, and like I can totally relate. And as it came out of my mouth, I was like, shit. I was nervous. All of a sudden I was like, well, I wasn't supposed to say that. And I was probably, 9-10 months sober at the time. And she was like, wait, what? And then she starts asking more questions. And she was like, well, what were you addicted to? And I wanted to just say, oh, just alcohol. Yeah. That's commonly acceptable. And I was like, heroin. And she was like, oh my gosh. And she got all teary eyed, and I'm so proud of you. And I think it was at that moment I realized. And she was like, why did you not tell me before now? That is such a powerful story. And I just said, candidly, it's because I'm not even a year sober. I think you would think less of me. And she was like, oh, buddy, you got that really twisted. And it still took me about another 6 months before I was really willing to share publicly. But I went to, it's when I changed my Instagram handle when I was competing back in the day, to the Sober Bodybuilder, which I honestly wish I could get a new one, but this is where we're at. We're rolling with it. And it was like kind of my coming out party to just everybody. And I was like, hey, and like a lot of people were like, oh, dude, I heard you were a massive drug addict. We're not surprised. Like, this is not new news. Like, Salt Lake City's not that big. Like, word gets around. And so I've just always felt a really strong pull to share my story. And, most of the responses are really good, but sometimes I get some people hating on Instagram. And, I don't do this for clout. I do it because if a hopeless junkie like me can build a life that's pretty cool, and there's nothing intrinsically special about me, I feel like God has kind of called me to share that message. And that's why I'm so honored to be on such a big platform sharing it. And I've shared it, hundreds of times on podcasts, but I'm really honored to be on here because, like, no matter what you're going through, no matter how dark it feels, like I would see going back to your question about parents' devotion, I would see this glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel when it was so dark, and I would just see it, and I would be like, God, there's got to be a better way. Like, there's a light down there. I don't know how to get there, but this is not the way I want to go. Like this tunnel, and so I just have felt, no matter what it is, like there's just. I mean, people still in my family are like, I'm shocked, dude. I still can't believe you're doing this shit. This is crazy. Like, because I was written off. I was hopeless, homeless, helpless. I was a full-blown junkie, and people don't usually live through 6 overdoses. I don't know why I did. But I feel like, it's my job to at least try to carry a message.
I'm a new Christian, so I'm a data person.
I know,
right?
yeah.
So I look at data, and
it's amazing, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. I wasn't surprised when I saw this, but one of the most common factors among people that recover from addiction is a belief in God.
Oh, 100%.
It's part of the 12 steps, right?
Yes.
Isn't it part? Yeah, and. Why
it's like the 12 steps, really.
Why do you think that is? Maybe somebody listening right now who needs help, what is it that they're looking for that they're not getting, that they're trying to get from maybe drugs or some other addiction that you end up finding through this spiritual connection?
It was interesting. Bill Wilson, who started the Alcoholics Anonymous with Dr. Bob, Bill Wilson was a hell of an entrepreneur, by the way. I'm not surprised. He turned this into this, it was nonprofit, but this altruistic movement. They started to identify that these people, what they were suffering from was a spiritual malady. Like they were maladapted to life, and they that the only thing, no human power could relieve me of my addiction. I tried many girls. I've seen people try for their kids, but if you are seriously a real addict and alcoholic, like that is your test in life. No human power can do that. And like they found that the only thing that worked for these people was God. Like they were kind of trying to be like, well, like let's help. And they're like, oh, we can only facilitate this. Like they've got to, that's why the whole premise of Alcoholics Anonymous is that you find a belief in a higher power, like that's greater than yourself. Like, and I just happen to call that God. And honestly, what's cool is I think they did a really good job about being like, we need to see where religious people are right, but that doesn't jive with you. Okay, don't let it steer you away, because if you do not find a connection to God, like all these hundreds of men we had helped, it was only men then.
Yeah.
The only ones who have stayed sober did one thing in common. It was develop this relationship with God. And I think that, I think it's so powerful. And I think that God is the only thing more powerful, because left to my own devices, I believe that the devil lies between my two ears most days. It doesn't lie in my heart. It doesn't lie in my gut intuition. It lies in between these two ears and the stories it tells me and the bullshit it makes up. And whether I'm not good enough for this, and left to my own devices, when I'm spiritually disconnected, I get really in between these two ears in a bad way. And not saying that's like, sometimes really good thoughts in between these two ears, like, but I believe that's where, that's where I get the shield of armor. And so I really believe that that is the missing link for most people to overcome an addiction, 100%. I think, there's a line in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that says God could or would if he were sought. And it's like, when you seek him, I've watched that, and it's been absolutely true, Sal. Anyone I've known that's got sober and stayed sober, that's been one common denominator, is that they have a relationship with whatever God they choose to believe in. Buddha, Allah, whatever, just spirit of the universe, Jesus Christ, whatever that is. I think is the most powerful thing we have.
Yeah. So what's interesting about this? So you're a fitness and nutrition expert. This is what you do now.
Yeah.
For a living, and so you understand this. The statement I'm about to make, but if you kind of live the way you're supposed to, you're going to be unhealthy. If you live the way that society tells you, I should rephrase that. Eat the way that they tell you to eat, live the way you're supposed to, work the way you're supposed to. You're going to be unhealthy physically. We know this. You're going to be obese. But we don't understand this around our spiritual health. We just don't. And so, we distract ourselves. We take no quiet time. We don't ponder these questions.
Yes.
The question is, you hear a lot of people now not even think about that. Whereas in the past, this was people pondered this. And I think that's one of the big issues. And so, my journey started off with fitness and then led me to where I'm at now. And I'm like, oh yeah, of course you're going to be sick spiritually if you live the way that the world tells you. You'd be sick in every way if you live the way the world told you.
100%. And I think that people really they underestimate, there's the right word, how much their spiritual health can play into their physical health, both positive and negative.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Did this lead to like a great awakening or self-awareness about yourself? Like what I mean is many times when people medicate with drugs and or food, there's something deeper that they're running from, or that they don't want to discover, or they want to ignore, or trauma that they buried years ago. Did this lead to a self-discovery for you? Did you find, like, I know you've referenced before that, like the fat kid in you, and you've had like that relationship, but were there things that after you got sober and you started to work on that relationship that you started to unpack of like what maybe actually led to the drugs and led to that for so many years?
Yeah, 100%. I remember when it finally hit me, and it was that day driving to the dealer's house, January 27, 2012, it hit me that they had said this shit in rehab, and I was like, that makes no sense. They had said things like, the drugs aren't the problem. You're the problem. They're your solution. And the problem is the solution worked for a minute, or we wouldn't keep doing it. Sometimes for a long minute. And eventually the solution to the problem becomes a bigger problem than the problem. And that's when you run into just full-blown addiction. Just can't stop. The solution that it works it always, like at some point it worked for somebody, like to do these drugs. Like,
I'm uncomfortable in my own skin.
Yeah.
Oh, now I'm comfortable.
Yeah. And pretty soon the solution to your problem, which the problem is you, it finally clicked. I'm like, because if drugs were just the problem, why would I be driving down to the dealer's house after 1 year of complete sobriety?
Right.
like, it's not like I'm hooked anymore. And I was like, oh my God, it's because I'm the problem.
Yeah.
Me. And so and what's interesting is I almost like, I was searching for this thing. I was like, because I would hear these people really, really, really common with females in addiction, sexual molestation, right? They're molested, but even a lot of guys molested. And I was like, I had a pretty good childhood. My dad worked a lot, and like then he had a lot of callings for our church. He wasn't home a ton, but like I didn't have anything horrific happen other than when I moved out here to the Bay Area. I was walking home from school in 6th grade, and I broke up with this girl. We're in 6th grade, keep in mind. These guys are in 9th grade, so that seemed like they were like 50 to me. They had Raiders starter jackets on. I've hated the Raiders ever since. And they beat me up. They shoved me around. There was
Typical Raider fan.
dude, nothing's changed.
Yeah. Yes.
You should have known. Of course.
Yeah, of course.
See all these fights that happen in LA too.
Yes,
These guys are crazy. Yeah. They beat me up pretty good. They kicked me. I remember get kicked in my head. They shoved me in the snow. They like kind of jumped me. I mean, I was in 6th grade and I was just as wide as I was tall. I'm like, give me a break, dude. Yeah. But that's the moment this paralyzing anxiety hit me. I mean, I went home and I didn't know how to describe it, but I went home and my mom said, I'm never going back to that school again. She shipped me out here to live like a good enabler. 2 days later, Santa Cruz, lived in Santa Cruz, came out here, and I think there was nothing super traumatic, but what had happened is I had such paralyzing anxiety and I didn't know what, and like, luckily this is more commonly talked about today. It wasn't back then.
Yeah.
I mean, this is 1997, and like I didn't know how to articulate that. They thought I needed Ritalin, so they put me on Ritalin and made it worse.
Oh, geez, for anxiety. Holy cow.
Yeah, like they just like he's kind of just can't focus. He's all over. He's really fidgety, and like so they put me on Ritalin, and that made it even worse. And I was always from that moment, and I've dealt with anxiety through my sobriety, not as much the last 3 or 4 years, and that's a God thing. That's not a me thing, because when I get away from God, this is how I know God works. I get it back. I start getting anxiety. And I just, I don't have an option to medicate that today. Well, at least not any like thing with Xanax or anything fun. And I don't medicate it at all. But and so I don't think, some people like uncover this, these really, really deep things that sometimes they hit like literally stuff so deep that like my buddy finally realized he got molested at 5. And he didn't even realize this. He had to go to therapy, and like his mom told him, and like I was like, what was my problem? And I think it was just I was escaped from that moment on. I was using to escape being me because it was so painful to be me, and that continued, throughout the rest of my life.
Wow.
I love the story you told about your client when you let them in on how that you were human. We convey this to coaches and trainers all the time.
Yep.
That I think when you first become a trainer or a coach, especially, you think you can present yourself as this perfect person, but that person doesn't connect with you. The client doesn't connect with you until they realize that you've had challenges as well. It just makes you more effective. How much of a better coach are you because of what you went through, and how much better of a coach have you developed as a result?
Oh, 100%. I love you guys are doing a great job with all that, by the way. I mean, you're mediocre, Alan. No, you guys have done a great job. By the way, you're getting jacked, dude. I just keep looking at it. I was like, damn.
It's 30 days, dog.
Getting jacked.
30 days.
Hands down has made me a better coach. It's helped me deploy more empathy. It's helped me understand. I would sit here when I'm like, I remember working at that Gold's Gym. Keep in mind, I'm literally going to my car and doing just enough heroin that they can't tell, but just enough so I can not get sick. Mm-hmm. And I'm judging some of these overweight people in the gym. Man, and I'm like, could you imagine being that guy? I remember having this conversation, like, shows up every day. It looks like he gained 5 more pounds. Like, wow. Zero empathy. And like the absolute insanity of that when I look back, that I would judge these people when I'm literally doing heroin on the lunch break. I would do the same thing when I was homeless. I'd be like, look at those guys with a shopping cart. Give me a break. What? Wow, losers. And I'm like, bro, you don't have a house. Like, so when I finally got sober, I started, I understood the like, man, those people are running to cover up a thing too. You usually don't, just accidentally eat yourself into 400 pounds. Mm. And that there's, food was the solution, and now it's obviously not. And you know what? They're in the gym, like you asshole. Looking back to that kid,
yeah,
Like just because I would take steroids and be jacked shooting heroin, like the level of narcissistic traits I conveyed at that time was insane to me. But again, I was so spiritually disconnected that the ego, and that for me, the ego is so strong. And I've always said an acronym for the ego is edging God out. When I'm living purely from my ego, I know I'm
You
not
are
spiritually
God now.
Yeah, yeah. And
you'd make a terrible God. All of us would.
oh, horrible. So grateful I just get to ride the passenger seat. You know, I'm just like, you right. Sometimes I try to take over the driver's seat and I don't do very good. And we have to take a detour. And I'm like, all right, you can drive back again, man. It's made me a way better coach because it's helped me connect more deeply. It showed the humanness. I think that I connect better with people because I think people connect with people. You know how it is. I mean, I think some of these clients struggle to connect with jacked, really good in shape trainers at first because they're looking like, what would you understand about me being obese?
Yeah.
And it's like when you can get real on any level, whether it's about addiction or whatever.
You know, you're talking a lot about grace. You know,
Yes.
when you
Got
coach
on my knuckles like a degenerate.
when you coach and you work with people, now you have you understand. It's funny, I was talking to my pastor and I said, you know, the way I communicated fitness for so long, once I figured out how to do it right and it was effective, I realized was so aligned with the Christian teachings. And he said, what do you mean? And I explained it to him. And he said, oh, you're doing grace-based fitness.
Wow.
And it hit me. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And it's funny, you brought up the people in the church, how nice they were to you, even though they knew
Yeah.
you were on drugs, even though they knew, but you kept, and they were good with you. And it's like when you work with a client that messes up, what's the best thing you could do? Grace. Hey, look, you messed up. No problem. Let's do this. Versus the shame and make them feel like garbage type of, which doesn't work. Absolutely doesn't work.
No. And that's, I see that a lot in the bodybuilding competitor coach world, right?
Well, if you want to be unhealthy, jacked, if you want to be
but they'll
dysfunctional that,
you got to use. I think that I think one thing that separates the good coaches from the great coaches is not just more knowledge. I think it's the ability to help a client on one side of the coin, give themselves just enough grace that they don't spiral into shame and guilt, but just enough grit on the other side to get back on track the next day. Like my good buddy Jordan Side always says, like, I always, you guys know Jordan. He always says, just get right back on track. And my client's like, that's not that easy. I'm like, okay, well, there's a couple deeper layers to it. Like, first off, you've got to learn to give yourself grace. But then subsequently, like shortly after, it's like, okay, but the grit part comes in on the other, like, and I think the coaches that can help a client genuinely give themselves, not just give them a pass. I think it's different to give a client grace.
You still stay honest. You're like, I know you screwed up and it's going to make it harder for us, but here's the deal. Everybody does.
That's the thing. I've always said the difference in my clients that I've coached thousands of people or 1,000 people in my career. I shouldn't exaggerate. Thousands is probably an exaggeration. And the one of the few common denominators with all the ones who've been successful long term, and to me, that's also they've maintained whatever transformation to a relative degree. 6, 9, 12, 18 months later, is that they're not that they didn't fall off. It's their ability to get back on track when they did fall off. Was more efficient and effective than the ones who weren't successful.
For sure.
And I think there's this misnomer that people look at people who had great transformations. And by the way, not in like 6 or 12 weeks, like some of these magazines will show, like it's like a year, right? And that they didn't screw up along the way. And I remember having a client say that about someone she knew that I worked with. And I was like, oh, that's her story to tell you. But why do you think she hasn't screwed up? Well, look how good she looks. I'm like, oh no, we had some huge fall downs, but it's not about the fall down. It's about the bounce back. Like, and I think that's what good coaches, they're always looking for more certifications, which is important. But if you don't know how to help a client develop those two skill sets almost simultaneously, then I think you're doing your clients a disservice.
You're working with a human. You're not working with a computer that you could just input instructions.
Yes.
And you can't hate yourself into better health. And I'm talking all health, fitness, mental, spiritual. You can't hate yourself into being healthier. Hating yourself is the opposite. So it is that. It is that grace. And it is that, okay, I screwed up and I did screw up. That's the honest part. But I can get going again.
100%. It's interesting with our business. We do online coaching, but we do Zoom calls with most of our clients, at least, every couple of weeks or every week for some of them. And opposed to just an online check-in. And here's the thing. I could make more money because you can stack more clients in one coach's roster, which is doing no touch points other than an email. But that kind of stuff, and you guys know this, like from being in person with people is where I'm not saying it's a prerequisite. You don't have to work with clients in person to be a good online coach, but I sure as hell think it helps.
Oh yeah.
Like immensely.
I think it's a massive disadvantage if you don't. That's what I think.
Like just that ability to connect and articulate.
Of course.
And know, because when you're personal training people, you're sitting down in between sets. I mean, you got an hour with these people.
Well, how many times do you see the information you need to know without them having to say it? Or a client says one thing,
body language,
and you're reading something else. You know, you can't do that virtually. And until you get really good at understanding that, reading it, then I think you might be able to do it virtually because you can kind of read between the lines. But if you don't have that experience in person, I don't know how you could do it personally. Yeah. I think it'd be very difficult. By the way, we are running a sale this month on some workout programs. MAPS Aesthetic and MAPS Symmetry, both very popular programs, both 50% off. If you're interested, go to mapsfitnessproducts.com, but use the code December50 for the discount. All right, here comes the show.
Tell me about Dominic. How's that changed your life?
Oh man, I can't even put it into words how much.
Was it immediately? Is there a total different version of you from the moment he was born to?
I mean, my behaviors probably show a little otherwise, but how I felt inside. Yeah, I think there was an immediate shift. You know, he was born in June 15th of 2020, right? Just batshit crazy time. I mean, you know, and I remember you know, he was about to come out, right? And he was born. And I remember just looking at him, was this instant connection, looking at his eyes, and I just started sobbing. And I went to the bathroom in the hospital, you know, when you had to wear masks, right? And I just had this like moment of gratitude, like where I was like, holy shit. Like I always wanted to be a dad. But when you start doing steroids at 17, like I wasn't working with much sperm, plus the drugs, plus all this, like it just wasn't really in the cards. And don't get me wrong, you know, IVF was involved, and I just sobbed, and I felt like something changed inside of me. And when I came out, funny enough, you know, my mask is just soaking wet, so I take it off, and they came in, and just a crazy time. I'm gonna tell the story when, you know, they're yelling at me to put my mask back on. I'm like, my kid's been born for 20 minutes. Leave me alone. And I'm just crying. It changed me immediately, dude. And you know, shortly after, I actually became a single parent. And you know, I 50-50 custody of him, and I think yours is
5. So they're close.
Yeah,
I have one that's almost 4. He was also born in 2020.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
11, 14.
Oh, that's right.
A little older.
Yeah. It's such a fun age, man. He teaches me so much.
Yeah.
And like, you know, it's interesting. It's really hard not seeing him every day. But when I do have him, one of my buddies was saying, he was like, dude, you spend way more time alone with your kid than I ever have with my daughter. Because I have to. You know, and now I'm engaged, and you know, he gets a bonus mom, and she's so great with him. And you know, it's I think being a parent, and it's really what helped us kind of get our message at Next Level Nutrition, was like, no, we want to help parents go from average to elite shape without sacrificing that time for the kid, because you can get in great shape, but you know, I mean, I think people would ask me if I were to compete again, and I was like, no, it's crossed my mind, but I know what I'd have to sacrifice, and business would hurt. But more importantly, I know I'd have to sacrifice that time with my kid. Yeah,
fitness is different than competing. That's a whole nother.
Yeah.
No,
that's a very selfish, different thing.
Whole different. Yeah. And so I think it's, you know, and also helping parents see that you're not selfish if you know, a couple hours out of the week, put your kid in the daycare. Because I thought that. This is back before I had 50-50, so maybe there was some relevance to it. But I would really beat myself up. Like, I can't believe I'm putting my kid in the daycare. Like, but I noticed it became less and less about like, I'm going to not be as jacked. And that's when my perception shifted of it. And I was like, no, I'm a better dad when I do this. I'm more patient. I'm more loving. When I just take that hour to put the oxygen mask on me, I do a quick little workout, so much more for like mental and emotional health at this point. And then we have a great killer day together. And I think that so many parents are such amazing parents because they put their kids so high up on the first, tier. But then what do you see? Like they talk about, when you're married, but you don't have kids, like your marital satisfaction is really high. And then but family satisfaction might not be as high. And then you get kids and it's like the family satisfaction goes ways up, but the marital does. And I think in the same way, like the fitness, like people just, I think it's so important to still prioritize your relationship. Not that I'm a relationship expert, clearly. And then also your relationship with yourself, both spiritually and physically, I think if you want to show up as a better parent, like you gotta take a little time away. And for me, I think that's devoting some time to a spiritual practice, whatever gets you aligned, and also to your physical health.
How much do you see of yourself in him? Are you at that point now where you're starting to see yourself?
Yes.
Yeah.
You see a lot.
Yeah. Oh yeah, of course.
Well, he looks just like you.
Yeah. He's my little mini me for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's totally
so cute.
Are there things that I think about this stuff all the time, right? Like, it sounds like you had a pretty good childhood as far as what your parents did. I think a lot of the things that I'm always thinking about is like, what did I miss or what did I want to implement? Are there things that you think about like that maybe you do different than what your parents did, or things that you're trying to create or you want him to learn, or like what does that look like?
Listen, I was the youngest of 5. My parents were not expecting me. They were done. Like they were great, but they were tired, man. Yeah. They had my oldest brother is about a 10-year age gap from me. And it was like almost consecutively, then a short little gap to my sister, and then a 3-year gap to me. And they were like, oops, there's one more. They just wanted the one girl and they were going to be done. And I came. Yeah. And they did a great job. But, having the advantage of only having the one, that's it. And I don't really foresee any more in my future. I think I do get a lot more, obviously one-on-one time from being a single, being seeing him every day, right? I don't know what the right word is because I'm engaged. I'm not really a single dad now, but I'm a 50-50 dad, whatever that word is. Yeah. Because she's great with him and helps a lot. But I see these things and one thing I've done, and at first I kind of felt cheesy about doing it, but every night before we go to bed, I say these affirmations to him. And I just said, hey, dude, everybody loves you. And then I'll point out everyone that loves him. And I say, you can do anything you want in this world, but you got to try. And I said, vulnerability is going to be your asset, not your weakness. And he's like, I had no idea what I'm saying.
One day though, it's going to hit.
Yeah. And I try to really instill and I just remind him that he's so loved. He's so capable. And it felt kind of cheesy when my buddy encouraged me to do it. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll try it. And now going on the last 2 years, I've done it almost every single night before bed. And I still don't think he understands what I'm saying, except for when I say, and grandma loves you. And he goes, yeah. So he knows the love you part. Yeah. And I think that's really important to speak that kind of confidence into kids. And, I don't know if it's going to pay huge dividends, but it's our little routine we do right after we close the book and at night. And that's, I just think... And I'm excited, one day at a time, he never has to see his dad drunk or high. But if addiction, which some people say is debatable, is anything genetic or hereditary, there's a chance. Like he might be like me where he uses, I had plenty of people I used with in high school that they got fired from a job, or one guy was like, oh, I'm going to be a dad. And I was like, so? And they're like, I'm stopping. They just stopped. Now those dudes smoke a little weed and drink and go snowboarding and they're fine. They didn't suffer from the same thing I did, even though they got addicted to very addictive drugs. But I'm gonna tell them about that kind of stuff and be very open with them. Dude, you might have this thing. So ultimately it's up to you, but you got to be careful out there.
Yeah. Addiction is much more common than we think in just many different ways. I just read some data. They did some research. TikTok was aware that 34% of their users exhibit addictive qualities within 30 minutes, the first 30 minutes of using their products. And the use of, our technology is big, food. People we're just addicted and don't realize it because we function and everybody else does it. But if you really examine it and look at your behaviors, those are addictive. Why can't I put this phone down? Or why can't I stop doing this?
Oftentimes they're destructive too. Yes. My fiance, probably our biggest fight we fight about is about that device right there, that phone. And, I appreciate her holding me accountable. And she said before, like, listen, I think you're addicted to your phone. And I rationalized, like, no, I just have 9 million things going on about it. Like, what am I supposed to do? Just ignore them all? Like, of course I'm going to be on it. And, but I think there's some truth to what she's saying. And it, at first I got super addicted to fitness. Okay. Very positive addiction compared, but then you get into competing and everything that comes with that. And then, it's kind of destructive on everyone else's life, but I look jacked, right? And it's like, and I've noticed this pattern and I think the phone has been a consistent one that I'm like, I don't want to admit it because I have plenty of reasons to justify, but it is. And it's caused problems. It's caused problems with me and her. I mean, just recently. And I think that we need to be super careful. And so I'm actually finally willing to look at it like, am I addicted? Like, if I just left my phone in the other room for 3 hours, am I going to panic? And I did.
That's a good, that's a good test right there.
And I was like, oh, where's my phone? I'm like, the habit of just picking it up and looking.
Yeah.
And I think it's so common. And there's a lot ones that are a lot less destructive and obvious than a gnarly drug addiction.
Yeah. Sometimes the worst addictions are the ones that are not as destructive because they're 100% pervasive.
100. I think, obviously we've been talking about, drugs and being addicted to that. But I mean, the thing that we all share in common is coaching and helping people. And I think the extra layer with food that's really tough is that it's socially accepted.
Yeah.
Like if someone saw you shooting up heroin, they'd be, oh my God, what a loser. Yeah. Like, so you hide it, you disguise it.
Eating like a box of cookies.
Yeah. You're only doing little bits of it to try and but if you're sitting down eating an extra 1,000 calories above your diet, ain't no one's saying shit to you. No. No one's saying nothing to you about that. And so it's so socially accepted that it adds a layer of complexity when it comes to accepting that you might be addicted to it. And very obvious to tell an addict who's shooting himself up, you're an addict because you shoot yourself up every day.
That's exactly my point. Like, how many more people die from these not crazy, scary looking addictions than the scary ones? Like, how many heroin overdoses? There's a lot. How many people die from obesity? A lot more. And so I think the real question, you said earlier, it's not the drug, it's you. I think the real question is, why are we all so... Why do we all get addicted to so many different things? I think it's a bigger question.
It's fascinating to me.
It is. And I think it's I honestly think it's a lack of, I really do, as my research shows, it's a lack of spiritual connection. And you need that. And maybe people who need it more, maybe you were blessed with a stronger need for spiritual connection. So you just reached more for drugs. I don't know. Yeah. But it's everywhere. Look around, so people listening right now, I don't have a heroin issue. You probably got some kind of issue you can't break or you're addicted to that's not causing you good.
100%.
So it is an interesting thing to look at.
On that note, I always said, and I know it's a little deeper than just food, but I think alcoholics, people who are alcoholics, I remember like people get sober and I'll be like, oh, yeah, I used to care. I'd be like, what was your drug of choice? Now I'm like, I don't give a shit. Like, you're here, whatever. And they'd say, just alcohol. And I'm like, I don't know if just alcohol, like literally, like I don't walk into the gas station and my drug of choice is just loaded up in a fridge. Like, and it's socially acceptable. So it takes people a lot longer to admit they have a problem. Sure. You bring in a bottle to a party. Hey,
right.
I wasn't allowed at a lot of parties. They're like, dude, you can come over, but do not be shooting up in my bathroom. Like you will get kicked out.
Right.
But even with, when you mention that, what's interesting is there will be moments where, Jen will say, hey, that's my fiance. She'll say, hey, thank you for like not being on your phone as much lately, especially when we're out to dinner. And she's like, thank you for trying. And I remember thinking in my head, I wasn't even really trying. And the one difference was I was so much more spiritually connected.
That's right.
Yeah. Like it wasn't even I was like, okay, don't bring my phone in. Don't look at it. Leave it in the car. I just didn't.
That's right.
And I was like, huh. And then I started making this connection. So I think these things are in our lives to give us this kind of like warning, right? Okay, if I'm back to, she's blatantly asked me, don't have it at the dinner table when we're eating dinner at home. And what did I do last night? Had it out. Yeah. Checking Instagram, responding people, doing talk to text, and then ordering clothes. And then we had a good little chat. And then she got mad. And I was like, what are you mad about? I was like, we had a good chat. For 10 minutes. So it's always kind of a call to action for me to look and be like, all right. And you know what? I have been a little more spiritually disconnected. And for this guy, for just me, Man, I miss some, I like to journal a lot too and write out my thoughts. It's kind of like a mini little prayer. And I brain dump a lot. I practice gratitude in a few different ways. And even just sharing my gratitude with other people definitely fills my cup spiritually. I'll write it down. I'm going to text him and I'm just like, dude, not just, hey, I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for you. Dude, that one time you showed up for me and like that stuff. And then that's just reciprocated, right? Then he feels it and then he gives it back. And it's just this. For me, like I think sometimes spirituality for me, and this the great news is you get to define your own definition, is anything that just brings me back to center and makes me feel like at peace,
joy,
yeah. And so that comes from many different forms, and religion could be one of them. I always tell people, religion and spirituality, you can be playing the same. Like they're the same game. They're both football. Spirituality is maybe more like you're going and you're playing a pickup game. There's not as many rules and regulations. Like. The other one is like, yeah, you got like refs there and like, it's a little, obviously not like, blowing the whistle, but it's a little more, but they're both the same. The essence is to win the game, and you can be spiritual and not religious, or you can be religious and not spiritual, or you can be both. Because I have people like, oh no, I hate the church. I'm like, okay, well just find some God then. Like if you don't want to believe in church, but that's fine.
I think looking and searching is the important thing, because you'll find it. You'll find the answer. It's when you're not looking. Yes. So if you ask someone the question, or do you believe in God? Well, oh yeah, I think so. If they don't really think about it, that's when you're in trouble.
Yes.
But seeking it, like if somebody said to me, "What's the first step to fitness?" Wanting to become fit. Now there's right ways to do it, wrong ways to do it. You could overdo it, whatever. But you got to think about wanting to become more fit first. That's the first step.
That's half the battle.
Once you're there, if you're honest and you have integrity and you really are looking to improve yourself in real ways, and you're going to take a lot of wrong directions, you'll eventually find the right way. And it might take you 15 years, might take you 20 years, might take you 1 year.
Yeah.
But if you're looking and you're trying, you'll eventually find. If you stick with it long enough, you'll eventually find it. So I think that's
100%. It's even interesting as I produce content. And listen, I'm not naive to the fact that some shit I put out there, I'm like, I'm going to get some shit from this. Like, I know this. And I used to really bother me. And I remember a friend told me a quote that just blew my mind. He said, their reaction to you is the
reflection of themselves.
Yeah, reflection of them. And he said, but here's the kicker. Your reaction to them, your reaction to them is the awareness in you. So how I choose to respond to these trolls is so important. Like, I mean, I shouldn't call them all trolls. They're human beings, but a lot of people aren't even following me, right? And they'll take some low blows. Like, I was like, get a can of Rogaine. I'm like, I do, asshole. Like, it's still not working. Like, they're like, you should enjoy a can of Rogaine instead. I'm like, I do, thank you. And and when I'm able to, like, sometimes I'll laugh with them. I'll be like, that was funny. Yeah. Like, they say some funny. One guy said, you look like a big dumb refrigerator with magnets all over it. And I was like, oh, I was like, the neck cat's like a magnet. Dude. It kind of is. I was like, and dude, I was laughing. I was like, and the minute when I allow these people to get under my skin, it is an immediate check for me to be like, what am I not doing mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually?
Totally. Why do they have power over me?
Why am I letting this guy rent space in my head telling me that, I mean,
it's great.
It's cool for us. See, what helps us is that we're all partners. And so if there's a comment about me, these guys will call it out and laugh about it. And that makes it funny. Yeah. Like somebody, like there was a video I did a while ago, and I was at this point I feel secure, but the video, the guy commented, all he put was weak chest. And these guys, are pointing it out, and I'm like, that's funny. Yeah, I haven't thought about that in a long time, and it's funny.
Weak chest.
Yeah, that was all it said.
I had somebody told me that a bird chest the other day. I'm like, you're not wrong. I was like, I did tear my pec, so give me some grace here. But
good stuff.
Yeah, I think that it's always a good, I think life throws us a lot of beautiful lessons, but I think so many of us are just blind to even look at them, you know?
100%.
I agree with that.
Well, Brad, thank you for telling your story, brother.
Yeah,
I really appreciate that.
Good having you here, bro.
Thank you. Yeah. It was a bucket list thing, like I said, so appreciate you guys, and, hopefully the listeners got some value out of that.
I think so. I think you're going to reach some people. I really do. So I'm appreciative that you shared that.
Promise you there's hope. No matter what you're going through, I promise you. but it's probably not going to come with just your willpower. You might need to link up with something greater than yourself too.
All right, I know you liked that episode. If you did, check this one out. 30% body fat. For men, this is way too high. This is actually a bit high for women as well. So in today's episode, we're talking about how you can go from 30 to 10. What is 10% body fat? This is when you have a visible six-pack. Can you go from 30 to 10%? Yes, it's possible, but not if you guess along the way. So we're going to talk about how you can do that in today's episode.
Now, there's a huge range, right, of like body types.
Yes.
Some people can run a little bit heavier or a little bit higher body.